Changing a simple Wi-Fi password should have been a routine, almost forgettable task. But for one black man living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, it triggered an encounter so absurd and unexpected that it soon unraveled a shocking truth. It all began on a sunny afternoon when he decided to update his home network security, a move that would normally go unnoticed. However, his neighbor, a woman who fit the all-too-familiar Karen stereotype, reacted as if a major crime had been committed. Furious and suspicious, she marched across the street demanding answers, convinced that something illegal or dangerous was happening. The man, calm and composed, knew his rights and stood firm. He had every reason to protect his privacy, especially after sensing that something wasn't quite right with his network connection. On the other hand, Karen, prone to overreaction and driven by her own biases, refused to accept that she had no authority over what he did inside his own home. Their clash was about much more than just internet access. It was a collision of entitlement, prejudice, and personal boundaries. Little did they both know, the situation was about to escalate beyond mere accusations, and what would soon be revealed would turn the entire confrontation on its head. The neighborhood was the kind of place people moved to when they were looking for peace, security, and a fresh start. Rows of well-maintained houses lined the clean streets, each with its neatly trimmed lawn and white picket fences. The community, though outwardly welcoming, had an unspoken sense of uniformity. Most of the residents were white, and any deviation from the norm was often met with thinly veiled suspicion. When the black man moved into one of the vacant homes, it stirred a ripple of silent curiosity. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, exchanging glances and whispers, pretending to be polite but clearly unsettled. Among them, Karen was the most outspoken. She had lived there for years and considered herself an unofficial guardian of the neighborhood's standards. From the very first day, she watched him closely, noting who came to visit, what times he left the house, and even what he wore. Her unease wasn't rooted in anything he had done. He was respectful, quiet, and kept to himself, but rather in the simple fact that he was different. Unaware of, or perhaps simply choosing to ignore, the growing scrutiny, the man settled into his new home. He worked long hours, often remotely, relying heavily on his internet connection for meetings and projects. It wasn't long before he noticed irregularities in his Wi-Fi network. Sudden slowdowns, odd devices appearing on the connection list, and unexplained lags during video calls. Suspicious that someone might be freeloading off his internet, he decided to take action. One evening, after finishing work, he accessed his router settings and changed the Wi-Fi password. It was a small, logical step to secure his private network, something any homeowner would do without a second thought. But this simple act did not go unnoticed. Karen, who had somehow gotten access to his Wi-Fi, whether by guessing the password or through less innocent means, suddenly found herself disconnected. The connection she had been quietly enjoying without permission vanished without warning. Infuriated and feeling personally affronted, she wasted no time. Instead of reflecting on her own actions, she immediately concluded that the man must be up to something nefarious. After all, why would he suddenly change his password if not to hide something? Storming across the street, she marched up to his front door, fists clenched at her sides. Without hesitation, she began pounding on the door, startling him out of his evening routine. When he answered, she wasted no time with pleasantries. Her voice was sharp, demanding to know what he was doing, why she couldn't access the Wi-Fi anymore, and insisting that he had no right to change the password without informing the community. He stared at her, momentarily too stunned by the sheer audacity of her demands to respond. Gathering himself, he politely but firmly explained that it was his private network and he had every right to change his password whenever he pleased. Karen, undeterred by logic or legality, escalated. She insisted that because the Wi-Fi had been open before, it was somehow a shared resource, like a communal park or streetlight. Her tone grew louder and more accusatory. She threw around vague threats about calling the homeowners association and implying that his behavior was disturbing the peace. when he again calmly explained that his internet service was privately paid for under his name, and thus his to control, her anger boiled over. Shouting that he was causing trouble in a quiet neighborhood, she pulled out her phone and threatened to call the police. Inside his own home, doing nothing more than securing his internet, this man now found himself accused of criminal behavior. Karen's voice was loud enough for other neighbors to notice. Blinds were pulled aside, doors cracked open, curious eyes peeking out. She played her role perfectly, a concerned citizen confronting a supposed threat, despite there being no threat at all. The man, maintaining his composure, refused to be intimidated. He invited her to leave his property, warning her that she was trespassing. This only fueled her outrage further, as she dialed 911, reporting that she felt unsafe and that a suspicious individual was refusing to comply with neighborhood norms. As he stood there watching her shout into the phone, a part of him felt the familiar, exhausting weight of being unfairly targeted. It wasn't new, but it was no less infuriating. Still, he knew better than to lose his temper. In situations like these, anger was often weaponized against people who looked like him. So, he waited, arms crossed, heart pounding but face calm, while Karen performed her theater of fear and victimhood, unaware that the truth and justice were not on her side. The evening air grew tense, neighbors whispering among themselves as the distant sound of sirens grew louder, signaling that this ridiculous and unjust confrontation was about to take an even bigger turn. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the calm evening, casting eerie reflections across the neat rows of suburban homes. Karen stood at the end of the driveway, waving her arms dramatically as the patrol car pulled up. She wore an expression of triumph, certain that justice was on her side. To her, the situation was black and white. She was a concerned citizen, and he was a suspicious outsider disrupting the neighborhood's peace. As the officers stepped out, she immediately launched into her version of events, her voice rising with every sentence. She complained about feeling unsafe, about the man acting aggressively, about him changing the Wi-Fi password and refusing to give her access as if that alone were a crime. The officers listened patiently, maintaining neutral expressions, trained to absorb information before making judgments. When they turned to the man, he remained calm, standing tall and collected. He politely explained his side. He had changed the password on his privately paid internet connection after suspecting unauthorized usage. He had not confronted Karen nor disturbed anyone. He simply secured his own property. As he spoke, his words were measured, careful, and factual. Then, he offered an extra detail that turned the entire situation upside down. He explained that he worked as a professional network security engineer, specializing in cybercrime prevention. Part of his routine was checking for breaches, and in doing so, he had discovered that an external device had been accessing his network without permission. He had kept logs, MAC addresses, and timestamps, evidence that left no room for doubt. The officer's demeanor shifted subtly. They asked to see the records, and the man obliged, showing them the neatly documented proof from his laptop. There, listed clearly, was a device connected to his network multiple times without authorization, and the device could be traced back to Karen's home. As the officers pieced everything together, it became painfully clear that the man was the victim, not the aggressor. Karen, realizing that the narrative was no longer favoring her, grew defensive. She stammered excuses, suggesting that maybe her phone accidentally connected, or that perhaps it was a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too detailed, too precise. One officer sternly informed her that accessing someone else's private network without permission was not only unethical but could also be considered illegal under state and federal laws regarding digital trespassing. Karen's face, which had been flushed with righteous anger moments before, drained of color. She stuttered apologies, insisting she hadn't meant any harm, that it had all been a mistake. The officers didn't arrest her but issued a formal warning about invading someone's digital privacy. They made it clear that any further complaints against the man without evidence of wrongdoing would be treated as harassment. They also suggested that she consider the seriousness of her actions before escalating petty grievances into police matters. Thoroughly humiliated, Karen backed away, her confidence shattered, her reputation among the neighbors undoubtedly tarnished. The man, relieved but still carrying the heavy weight of the ordeal, thanked the officers for their professionalism. After they left, he sat in his living room, letting the events replay in his mind. It wasn't just about a Wi-Fi password. It was about how quickly assumptions could turn an innocent act into a confrontation simply because of who he was. It was about the deep undercurrents of entitlement and prejudice that still thrived in places that claimed to be welcoming. He decided he wouldn't let the incident pass quietly. Not out of spite, but because it needed to be talked about. He upgraded his home security systems the next day, installing a more advanced firewall, encrypted routers, and even setting up a private VPN. He wrote a detailed post online, recounting the entire experience, not with bitterness, but with a focus on raising awareness. He talked about the importance of digital security, the dangers of racial profiling, and how even small, seemingly trivial confrontations could escalate dangerously when bias was involved. His story quickly gained traction, resonating with thousands of people who had faced similar experiences. Comments poured in, some sharing solidarity, others expressing outrage at Karen's actions, and many thanking him for shining a light on the intersection of technology and social prejudice. Over time, the man became somewhat of an advocate for digital rights and racial justice, speaking at local events, advising others on how to protect themselves both online and offline. Karen, meanwhile, kept a low profile, rarely seen outside except for brief, uncomfortable moments when she had to leave her house. The dynamics of the neighborhood shifted slightly. Some neighbors, ashamed of their earlier silence, made tentative gestures of friendliness. Others remained distant, unwilling to confront their own biases. In the end, the man had turned an infuriating, unjust confrontation into a platform for education and change. He understood that not every battle needed to end with shouting matches or legal battles. Sometimes the most powerful victories came through calm resilience, truth, and the decision to turn anger into action. As he sat on his porch one evening, sipping tea and watching the sunset over the quiet street, he reflected on the irony of it all. A simple Wi-Fi password had revealed so much more than stolen internet. It had exposed the hidden fractures in a seemingly perfect neighborhood. And now, because he had chosen to face it with strength and wisdom, it had also opened a path for healing and awareness, however slow and uncertain that path might be.